What's going on, guys? We got big news in the Star Wars Unlimited community. Fantasy Flight Games has suspended Jango Fett, DJ, and Triple Dark Raid. I'm going to talk about these suspensions, what they mean, why they happened, and what they might mean for the meta going forward. Let's get into it. So the first suspension was Jango Fett concealing the conspiracy. He is, of course, a leader that's been really strong recently, but we also saw Triple Dark Raid and DJ Blatant Thief being suspended here. This is going to be a big change to the competitive meta. The Jango deck is removed. Han decks, which were very strong in the previous sets meta before Jango got empowered by Jump to Light Speed, are going to be considerably weaker without DJ. So it's going to be a bit of an open meta again. And it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. So again, Jango Fett concealing the conspiracy suspended. You can't play this leader at all. Triple Dark Raid, which was a really good card for Jango, also suspended. So you can't bring that into other decks. And DJ Blatant Thief suspended as well. So all of those cards removed from competitive play, at least for the time being. And let's talk about why. So Jango, as a leader, had too strong performance in a bunch of the early events. He was doing well above his representation. We were typically seeing Jangos being maybe like 20% of the meta or even less, but then taking half or more of the top 8. His multi-exhaust ability on his leader side, when he no longer needs to exhaust an enemy unit, became too strong with certain new cards. So IG 2000 and War Juggernaut in particular were really powerful. And Jango was counterable, I think, but he was still a balance issue overall. He was way too prevalent, and we had a really Jango-focused environment. I felt like you were either playing Jango, you were playing something that you thought could beat Jango, or you were maybe not doing that well. And so that was the issue with Jango. In their stream, Fantasy Flight discussed how their internal testing had actually overlooked Jango in favor of Boba Fett from set 1. They had been testing before the balance changes that suspended Boba Fett, and they thought that a lot of the cunning villainy type cards were likely going to be run in Boba builds in competitive play. And they may well have been right if Boba had not been suspended, but because they were testing without knowing that Boba would be suspended, they overlooked some of the things that Jango could do that were really powerful. He ended up being too strong. He's being removed. It should broaden the meta overall. The sector qualifier events where he was way too strong, we're not going to see stuff like that again necessarily. And he could also just be too uninteractive to play against. I think that in general, a play pattern of repeatedly exhausting all your opponent's stuff just isn't really that fun for a lot of players. So, lots of reasons to take action on Jango, and they did. So we'll see what happens next. Triple Dark Raid. This is an interesting card. It was actually balanced when it first came out. So the way this card works is when you play it, you search the top 7 cards of your deck for a vehicle and play it. It costs 5 less. It comes into play ready, and it goes back to your hand at the end of the phase. If you compare this to Sneak Attack discounts the card that you're playing less, and it is defeated instead of going back to hand, and it has to be played from hand instead of searching from the top of your deck. But Sneak Attack does not have the vehicle restriction, and it doesn't have a miss chance. So Triple Dark Raid was, when it came out, was basically a much stronger Sneak Attack, but it was made fair because it was quite inconsistent. And I've seen this as someone who's done a lot of casting for competitive events. I have seen games, especially in the previous meta, where people play that Triple Dark Raid and they don't find any vehicle, or they find only 7th Fleet Defender and they were looking for something bigger, or similar sorts of things. So Triple Dark Raid, I totally understand that it was not that crazy when it came out. In fact, it only really started seeing a ton of competitive play in set 3 after having been released in set 2. But once set 4 came around and we had another set's worth of vehicles, especially in a set that really focused on space units, we ended up in a scenario where that inconsistency on Triple Dark Raid more or less went away completely. So instead of being a stronger Sneak Attack but inconsistent, it was basically just a stronger Sneak Attack. And Sneak Attack is already a card that sees competitive play. I was playing it at Denver. Some of the Jango decks were playing both of them. And Triple Dark Raid just had too much overall advantage. One thing that I think is maybe instructive is that in Jango in particular, in set 3, if you were hoping to Triple Dark Raid for something that pinged enemy units when played to get an exhaust, you had 2 units in your deck that did that. It was the Elite P-38 Starfighter and the Ruthless Raider. And With the jump to lightspeed releases factored in, you went from 2 units that could do that to 5, as we added IG-2000, War Juggernaut, and the new Devastator. And to make matters worse, those 3 new units could all exhaust multiple units at a time. So the odds that you had to hit a single exhaust went up by a huge amount, and you now had better odds to hit a multi-exhaust in this set than you did of hitting a single exhaust in the past, at least if you had enough resources to pay for Devastator. So overall, Triple Dark Raid, it was balanced by the card pool that was available. That card pool really shifted, and it became no longer balanced. That's what I would say about this card. Now it's getting suspended too. Yes, Jango was the main user, but there were other decks that played this card as well, and now those decks are not going to be able to use it. So if you were playing, Boba 4, if you were playing Vonreg and you had Triple Dark Raid in there, you might have to find a substitution. DJ, Blatant Thief, our last suspension of the day. DJ is a really weird card. He is the only effect in the game right now that can remove someone's resource and steal it and keep it permanently. When combined with Han Solo from set 1, where you can defeat the enemy resource that you've taken, which then means that when DJ is defeated, there isn't a resource for the opponent to regain control of. So that was a very very strong combo, and it has been a strong combo since DJ was released. We really saw it becoming prevalent, I think, in the third set, where Han was the strongest leader in competitive play. Works really well with Tech as well. Tech is a very strong card, but can be used to smuggle out DJ early, and can be used to smuggle out DJ in decks that aren't double yellow. So the way that the Tech DJ synergy worked was that if you had Tech on the field, you could smuggle out DJ for 5 using Tech's alternate cost instead of the smuggle cost that's actually on DJ, and you would only need 1 cunning aspect instead of 2. This allowed you to often delay people even being able to deploy their leader, because you could, instead of being able to smuggle this out at 7 resources, you would be able to smuggle it out much earlier in the game. And there's also the ability in a double yellow Han deck to do the Han 5, 6, 7, where you start at 5, use Han's ability, go to 6, deploy Han and swing, go to 7, then bring out DJ. So there were a lot of ways for DJ to take your resource. We ultimately didn't see him seeing all that much play outside of Han decks, but in Han decks he was crazily strong. The permanent resource destruction can be really frustrating, and it honestly more or less invalidated harder control decks and slower leaders. So, if you were trying to play, if you're trying to play like Iden double blue, and your goal is to stall the opponent, kill their stuff, get to 8 resources to super laser blast, and then take over the game with Avenger, this is a viable game plan without DJ, but with DJ, you're potentially getting deramped multiple times. You may not be able to even get to 8 resources to play that super laser blast you need. Similarly, if you're playing, Vader from set 1, your leader deploys on 7. Are you getting to 7 against potential multiple DJs? You might not. So that was a big issue. The other funny thing about DJ is he's actually really strong even when not using this ability. 3 for 3/5 vanilla is like a competitive stat line. People play Liberated Slaves, which is 3 for 3/5 vanilla and just does not have any text at all. So you didn't even need to be hitting this crazy combo for DJ to be good. I think suspending him may prevent a Han takeover of the meta. In the Twilight of the Republic meta last set, we saw Han as the most successful deck in competitive play. Now, he wasn't at the point where FFG thought he had to be banned, but he was clearly the top after the PQ season. And so with the suspension of DJ, Han may not return to as high a position. I'm not saying Han's going to be non-viable, but he will be missing one of his best tricks, and that should open the meta more for experimentation instead of people just dusting off the Han decks that were doing great in the previous set. So what happens to the meta now? The previous meta wasn't fully assessed. I want to be clear on that. People had not totally figured out what to do, but Jango was the top deck, and the meta seemed pretty defined by Jango and anti-Jango decks, where you were either playing Jango, or you were playing something that could beat Jango, or you were in a pretty bad spot. People were main decking relatively narrow counter cards for Jango, so we could see fewer copies of Electromagnetic Pulse, Commandeer, that sort of thing. Those cards were being included largely for those Jango matchups. Possible people will keep them around, but if Jango is a diminished part of the meta, I think it's possible they'll get cut as well. Han was the deck to beat last season, as I was just discussing, but he has been weakened by the loss of DJ. So it could be interesting to see some reactions. Han, people might go back to Han decks and try to update them without DJ. I think in particular Han Green suffers less from losing DJ compared to Han Yellow. And here are some other ideas that come to mind though, in terms of things that I think might be quite relevant. So first up, who's going to replace Jango? Villain tempo has historically been really strong. So like an aggro tempo type deck with cunning villainy. We saw that first with Boba Double Cunning, which was a very strong deck in set one, also very strong in set two, and the Jango kind of took up the helm of that, which is funny. So Jango was at what kind of a direct replacement to the Boba Red space aggro deck, but his exhausts turned it into more of an aggro tempo deck. However, this villain yellow tempo type build has often been pretty strong, and its previous leaders have now been suspended. Is there somebody else that's going to take up the crown? So the most direct swap would probably be Boba Fett, Any Methods Necessary, or Red Boba. But he doesn't really have the same tempo things that Jango could do. He's more of a like pile on the damage guy more than he has the disruption to opponents. I haven't been really impressed by this leader overall. Because he's actually been pretty popular, but he's been underperforming his representation by a lot, not doing that well in events despite a bunch of people playing him. But it is an easy switch to make, and it's possible new tech will be discovered. People will make versions of Boba that incorporate more disruption or similar to help fight against aggro. And I do think because he is such an easy swap, and he wants to play a lot of the same cards, we're probably going to see a lot of experimentation with this leader. Whether or not they manage to find out a more effective composition, that I think remains to be seen. I haven't been thrilled by the builds that we've already been seeing from Boba, Any Methods Necessary. So we'll have to see where we go. Another thing that might happen in this meta is that control decks might come back. So with no DJ, those harder control decks and later game leaders might be viable again. I would expect to see a bunch of players experimenting with these builds. So previously they really struggled to deal with DJ in time, and losing resources permanently is really bad for a deck that actually plans to get up to 9 or 10 resources to do its endgame plays. These decks might now be a really good answer to more mid-rangey opponents. There's several different leaders that we see running these. So Iden is a big one. In set one, we had double blue Iden, which has remained popular for some time. We've also seen Iden Red. We've seen Palpatine. We've seen Darth Vader from set one. We've seen Bosk. A Bosk blue deck actually won a sector event in Europe. So some of these control decks might be more viable. It should be interesting to see. And you'll notice that I did not mention Kira here. I think Kira is going to be quite good. But historically speaking, Kira has generally been a softer control deck, which, if anything, is countered by the harder control decks. So I think that in the event that the harder control decks do come back, that would actually be a point against Kira. However, we're going to have to see how exactly that goes, and it's possible that you'll be able to figure out answers by having a Kira deck that has some adaptation to deal with the harder control. Maybe you're going for the ramp into relentless plan, for instance. A lot to be said there, and that's an area of the meta that I think is ripe for exploration. What's going on with the control deck, soft control or hard control, and how they counter each other, and so on. So that should be interesting. And then finally, probably my favorite leader in the game, good old Sabine Wren. Last season, the top three were Han, Sabine, and then Jango. Two of those three just got nerfed or removed. Sabine, on the other hand, did not get nerfed or removed. Sabine is doing as well as she ever has been. Yellow Sabine decks didn't even really play DJ. So Sabine was untouched by the changes. And if we do see more people flocking to control, that's what Sabine really likes to see. So I think that we could see a big return of Sabine early on in this set. I played Sabine at Denver. I did okay. Didn't do amazing, but definitely won more than I lost. And I think that Sabine still had some viability, especially cunning Sabine in the pre-suspension meta. But she was a lot less popular than we had seen from her in previous sets, and I think it's possible that might change. However, Sabine has a lot more aggro rivals these days. There are several new aggro leaders printed in Jump to Lightspeed. So we've seen decks like Von Reg, Kazuda, Poe Dameron, and it's possible one of these will end up being a stronger aggro composition. I do think that with this really strong with this really strong tempo deck in Jango being removed, I think it may be an interesting time for aggro. But time's going to tell where that ends up. Is it going to be Sabine? Is it going to be one of these other leaders? Are other people going to find some really good new tempo deck that counters them very well? We'll have to see what happens. I personally think that it's an exciting time to be testing stuff out and seeing what's going to be good. But Sabine does seem like she might be a solid bet. Okay, so what do you guys think? Are you happy with these bans? Personally, I am very happy with these suspensions. I think it was a good job. I think it was a good job by FFG, and it should open up the meta a lot. I was originally saying that I thought that good suspensions would be just DJ and Triple Dark Raid without Jango being suspended directly. But suspending Jango directly is, it's a bit more abrupt of a move, but I think it will probably end up with a wider and more experimental meta, which should be really interesting to see. I don't think Jango was unbeatable, but I do think that removing him is going to open things up a lot, and I'm very excited to see where Star Wars Unlimited goes from here. Yeah, let me know in the comments below what you guys think. If you're of the opinion that these were a mistake or they should have banned something else, or you think you have a great sense of what the new top deck is going to be, I'd be very interested to hear it. So thanks for watching, guys, and until next time, TowerNumber9 signing off.